The calling card tore with a sound so small that only Beatrice Elloway seemed to hear it. London had taught her that ruin rarely announced itself with thunder. It came in the whisper of silk at a drawing-room door, in the pause before a lady smiled, in the careless snap of thick cream paper between two gloved fingers. On a grey afternoon in May, 1852, inside the gilded drawing-room of Merrow House in Mayfair, Beatrice stood beside the rosewood card tray and watched Lady Octavia Cresswell, Marchioness of Merrow, destroy the only printed proof that Beatrice had ever been received there as anything more than useful. The room was full of quiet splendour. A chandelier glittered above polished furniture. Porcelain cups waited on silver trays. The windows looked out upon a square where carriages rolled past with the soft authority of people who belonged wherever they stopped. Beatrice did not belong. She had known that for 3 years, though no one had said it quite so plainly until Lady Octavia lifted the small white card and read the name aloud. Miss Beatrice Elloway. The words passed through the room like an accident no one meant to acknowledge. Lady Dalrymple, who had come to discuss a subscription concert, lowered her teacup by less than an inch. Mrs. Arvanel glanced toward the door. Miss Lavinia Say, pretty, pale, and dressed in blue silk that cost more than Beatrice earned in 6 months, looked briefly amused. Beatrice kept her hands folded before her black gown and did not move. She had spent the morning arranging invitations, copying replies, checking names against Lady Octavia's list, and placing each card in the proper order of consequence. Dukes first. Then marquises, earls, viscounts, barons, and those whose money almost excused their lack of title. Her own card should not have been there. It had been tucked by mistake beneath Lady Helena Vale's, perhaps left from an errand the week before when Beatrice had carried a note for the Marchioness. A small error. A harmless piece of paper. Yet Lady Octavia held it as if it were evidence of theft. How curious, the Marchioness said. Her voice was gentle enough to make cruelty sound like household management. I was not aware, Miss Elloway, that you had begun presenting yourself among my guests. Beatrice felt every face turned toward her. Heat rose behind her ears, but she had long ago learned that shame could be survived if one did not give it a chair. It was placed there in error, my lady, she said. I will remove it at once. An error. Lady Octavia smiled. She was a handsome woman of nearly 50, built of posture, pearls, and old suspicion. Yes. That is the word people often use when they reach for a position above the one Providence assigned them. Near the mantel, Lord Edmund Cresswell shifted his weight. Beatrice did not look at him. Looking at him would be a confession, and she had given him too many silent confessions already. For 6 months, Edmund had found reasons to speak with her in the library, in the passage beside the conservatory, at the writing desk where she managed his mother's correspondence. He had praised her mind when no one could hear. He had said the world was smaller than people pretended. Once, while snow pressed white against the windows, he had touched the edge of a letter she was sealing and murmured that he would speak to his mother when the season quieted. Beatrice had been foolish enough to understand him. Not aloud. Never aloud. But hope did not need a declaration in order to become dangerous. Lady Octavia knew. Of course she knew. Mothers in Mayfair heard promises through walls. The Marchioness turned the calling card slowly between her fingers. A companion's usefulness depends upon her discretion. A paid gentlewoman may write letters, pour tea, and assist in the smooth running of a house. She may not confuse proximity with equality. Beatrice heard the word paid as if it had been laid on the carpet for others to step over. Her father had been a clergyman in Sussex, a bookish man with kind eyes and debts hidden inside sermons about contentment. After his death, kindness had not paid the grocer, nor had gentility mended her gloves. Beatrice had come to Merrow House because she could write a graceful note, remember family connections, and keep secrets that were not hers. She had not come to steal a place in the drawing-room. She had not come to fall halfway in love with the one man in the house too weak to defend what he had awakened. My lady, Edmund said at last, and the faintness of his protest wounded Beatrice more than silence. Lady Octavia did not turn. Yes, Edmund. He looked at his mother, then at Beatrice, then at the carpet. Miss Elloway meant nothing by it. Nothing. The room accepted the word. It settled over Beatrice's shoulders like a shawl soaked in cold water. Nothing was safe. Nothing asked no courage of him. Nothing could be folded away and forgotten. Lady Octavia's smile sharpened. I am certain she did not intend to appear presumptuous. Intention, however, matters very little when the appearance is improper. She lifted the card higher. There are levels in society for a reason. They spare everyone embarrassment. Beatrice drew one careful breath. Beyond the half-open doors to the music room, a shadow moved. She noticed only because she had trained herself to notice what titled people ignored. A dark sleeve. A still figure. Someone had entered without being announced, or had been waiting there long enough to hear. The knowledge struck her and vanished beneath Lady Octavia's next words. The Marchioness tore the card in two. The sound was delicate. Final. One half fluttered to the turkey carpet near Beatrice's hem. The other remained between Lady Octavia's fingers. Find someone your level, she said. No one gasped. That was the worst of it. A scream would have been kinder. Outrage would have admitted that harm had occurred. Instead, the ladies held their cups, Lavinia's mouth curved, and Edmund looked as if he had been asked to stand in a cold wind without a coat. Beatrice bent and picked up the fallen half of her card. Her fingers trembled once. She stopped them by pressing the paper against her palm. Only half her name remained. Miss Beatrice L. It seemed almost merciful. Even the paper had been allowed to lose the part of her that society found inconvenient. Thank you, my lady, she said. Her voice surprised her. It did not break. Lady Octavia's brows lifted. For what, Miss Elloway? For making the matter plain. A silence entered the room. Not the pleasant silence of good breeding, but the kind that arrives when a woman expected to collapse chooses instead to stand. Beatrice lowered her eyes, not in surrender but because a curtsy still belonged to the rules she refused to let them make ugly. If you will excuse me, I shall see that the remaining notes are copied before dinner. That will not be necessary. Lady Octavia's reply came at once. I believe you have done enough for today. Edmund took half a step. Beatrice. Her name in his mouth nearly undid her. Not because it was tender, but because it was too late. She looked at him then. Once. He had the grace to pale. Lord Edmund, she said, and the title placed the distance between them more cleanly than accusation ever could. She turned toward the door. Each step felt measured before a jury. She passed the tea table, the carved chairs, the women who would repeat the scene later with softened voices and sharpened pleasure. Her gown brushed the edge of the card tray. For an instant, she saw all the names lying there in order of importance, each one whole, each one welcomed. She kept walking. At the threshold, she felt rather than saw the presence from the music room. A man stood just beyond the door, tall and motionless, dressed in dark afternoon clothes cut with severe elegance. His hair was black, his face composed, his gaze fixed not on Lady Octavia, not on Edmund, but on the torn paper pressed inside Beatrice's hand. She knew him by reputation before anyone spoke his name. Sebastian Vale, Duke of Alderwick. One of the highest-ranking men in England. A man mothers praised in public and feared in private because his approval could lift a family and his contempt could freeze one out of a dozen drawing rooms. He should not have been there. He should not have heard. Beatrice lowered her gaze and passed him with the careful speed of a woman determined not to be seen bleeding. For one brief second, his hand moved, not to stop her, not to claim authority over her pain, but as if instinct had nearly overcome discipline. Then he let her go. Behind her, Lady Octavia's voice regained its smoothness. Your Grace, I was not informed you had arrived. Beatrice did not turn back. The corridor beyond the drawing room was dimmer, cooler, safer by inches. She reached the side table near the stairs and placed one hand upon it, just long enough to steady herself. The torn half of the calling card lay against her palm. She closed her fingers over it before anyone could take that, too. In the drawing room behind her, a chair shifted. A cup touched its saucer. Then came no apology, no defense, no rush of footsteps from Edmund. Only silence. Beatrice walked on. She did not know that after she left, the Duke of Alderwick looked down at the carpet near Lady Octavia's chair. She did not see him bend with unhurried precision and pick up the other half of her calling card. She did not hear the room go still as he turned the torn paper over and read what remained of her name. "Miss Elloway," he said quietly. "Who is she?" The Duke of Alderwick held the torn half of Beatrice Elloway's calling card as if it were not paper but testimony. No one in the drawing-room moved at first. Lady Octavia Cresswell had spent 30 years making silence serve her. She knew how to arrange it around a guest, how to freeze a servant with it, how to press a young woman into obedience without raising her voice. Yet the silence that followed the Duke's question did not belong to her. It belonged to him. He stood near the edge of the turkey carpet, tall and still, his dark coat severe against the pale silk walls. The room seemed smaller because he was in it. Lady Dalrymple looked down at her tea. Mrs. Arvanel discovered an urgent interest in the painted fan across her lap. Miss Lavinia Say's smile had vanished. Only Lord Edmund Cresswell remained by the mantel, colour creeping up his throat as if shame had finally found him, though not enough to move him. Lady Octavia recovered first. "A former companion in my household, Your Grace. A useful girl, in her proper place, but inclined to mistake kindness for invitation." The Duke looked at the card again. The torn edge crossed the printed name unevenly, cutting through the surname as if someone had tried to divide the woman herself. "Former," he repeated. That was decided in the last 30 seconds. Lady Octavia's hand tightened around the other half before she remembered she no longer held it. Her fingers closed upon nothing. "You misunderstand. Miss Elloway has been with us some time. Naturally, arrangements change when a young person begins to forget the boundaries of good sense." "Boundaries?" His voice remained low. It had the kind of restraint that made louder voices seem undisciplined. "I heard a card being torn, Lady Merrow. I heard a woman of your house insulted before guests. I have not yet heard what crime required such ceremony." A faint shock passed over the ladies. Dukes did not ordinarily correct marchionesses in their own drawing rooms. They especially did not do so over paid companions with black gowns, careful handwriting, and no fortune. Lady Octavia smiled again, but the expression no longer reached her eyes. "Your Grace is generous, but society rests upon distinctions. It would be unkind to encourage Miss Elloway in illusions." "Whose illusions?" he asked. Edmund moved at last. "Your Grace, perhaps this needn't concern you." The Duke turned his head. "Not quickly." That made it worse. "Lord Edmund, I am beginning to suspect that it concerns you a great deal." Edmund swallowed. He was handsome in the soft way of men who had never been required to choose discomfort over ease. "Miss Elloway has served my mother admirably. There was a misunderstanding, nothing more." "Did you give her reason to misunderstand you?" The question landed with the clean force of a door closing. Lavinia lowered her eyes. Lady Octavia's face sharpened. Edmund looked briefly toward his mother, and that glance answered before he did. "I was kind to her," he said. "You should try it in daylight," the Duke replied. The room went breathless. Lady Octavia rose from her chair. Pearls shifted at her throat. "Your Grace, I must protest this implication. My son has done nothing improper. Miss Elloway is a clergyman's daughter of reduced means. She was treated with every consideration here." "Was she?" The Duke folded the half card once, not enough to damage it, only enough to keep it safe between his fingers. "Then why did every person in this room watch her leave as though dignity were an offense?" No answer came. The Duke did not wait for one. He inclined his head with impeccable politeness, which somehow made his contempt more complete. "Lady Merrow, I came to discuss the North Riding subscription papers." "That matter can wait. I find myself more interested in the standards of this house." He crossed the drawing room toward the door. Edmund made a small movement, as if to follow, then stopped when his mother spoke his name without turning. The single word pinned him in place. In the corridor, the air was cooler. A footman near the stairs stiffened at the Duke's approach, but Sebastian Vale barely saw him. Ahead, the narrow passage toward the writing room stood empty. He followed it, guided less by sound than by the sense of a presence recently wounded and determined not to be found weeping. He discovered Beatrice at a small desk beneath a high window, where the household correspondence waited in tidy stacks. Her bonnet lay beside the inkstand. Her hands were steady now, too steady. She was copying addresses onto folded notes with the care of someone finishing a duty after being dismissed from the life attached to it. The half-card rested near her wrist. She did not look up at once. If Lady Merrow sent you to inspect whether I have stolen the stationery, Your Grace, I regret to disappoint her. I have only used the sheet already blotted. The corner of his mouth almost moved. It did not become a smile. Not yet. Lady Merrow did not send me. Her pen paused. Then she rose so quickly the chair made a soft scrape against the floor. Your Grace. She curtsied with exactness. Not servility. Exactness. He noticed the difference. Miss Elloway. Her eyes flicked to his hand. She saw the paper. Something crossed her face before she hid it. Pain, yes, but also alarm. It struck him that she had expected the other half to be thrown away. Perhaps that had happened often in her life. Things belonging to her had been discarded by people who never thought to ask whether they mattered. You dropped this, he said. He held it out. She did not take it immediately. No, Your Grace. Lady Merrow dropped it. Then I am returning it to the wrong person. Not if you intend kindness. I don't intend kindness, he said. Kindness is too small for what happened in that room. Her fingers closed around the paper at last. The two halves nearly met in her palm, though the tear remained visible. Then I do not know what you intend. Respect. She looked up at him fully. Her eyes were grey, not pale, but clear in a way that made evasion feel vulgar. She was younger than her composure made her appear, perhaps 27, perhaps a little more. Not a girl. Not hardened either. Her dignity had not thickened into bitterness. That made the insult worse. Respect is a dangerous gift in a house where I am paid to be convenient, she said. Are you paid to be humiliated? A breath left her. She glanced toward the corridor, measuring doors, servants, footsteps. He understood. Even a conversation with him could be used against her if framed by the wrong mouth. He took one step back, deliberately placing more space between them. I will not compromise you. The door remains open. I will leave if you ask it. That seemed to unsettle her more than any command might have done. Most gentlemen say such things after they have already decided to stay. Most gentlemen appear to have poor habits. A reluctant flicker touched her mouth and vanished. He treasured it more than he had any compliment paid to him that month. Your Grace, I am grateful for the return of the card, but I must finish these notes. Lady Merrow dislikes disorder. Lady Merrow dislikes witnesses. Beatrice lowered her eyes. There are many things in this house that are disliked, Your Grace. Few of them alter anything. This one may. Because you heard it? Because you did not deserve it. Her hand tightened around the torn card. Deserving has little influence over a woman's place. Who told you that? Everyone, eventually. Some are simply more graceful than others. He studied the neat piles of letters, the ledger, the ink stains near her cuff carefully hidden from the drawing room. Do you have family in London? No. The answer came too quickly. Elsewhere. She hesitated. An aunt in York. Mrs. Isolde Penrith. Would she receive you? She would scold me first. Then she would put me in the best room and pretend the fire was already lit. The picture was so immediate that he heard the homesickness beneath it. Then you are not without refuge. Her expression closed. Your Grace, refuge is not the same as a future. No. But it is better than remaining where people call cruelty instruction. Before she could answer, Lady Octavia's voice sounded from the far end of the corridor. Miss Elloway. Beatrice straightened as if a cord had been pulled through her spine. The Marchioness approached with Edmund behind her and Lavinia lingering near the stairs. Her smile returned when she saw the Duke standing at a proper distance, though her eyes moved quickly to the card in Beatrice's hand. How diligent. Still at the desk. Since you are here, you may write a brief note to Lady Dalrymple explaining that your card was placed in the tray through your own carelessness. It will prevent unnecessary gossip. Beatrice's face went pale. Edmund looked away. The Duke did not. That note will not be written, he said. Lady Octavia stopped. I beg your pardon. You may issue whatever explanation you choose for your own conduct. Miss Elloway will not apologize for being insulted. The Marchioness gave a small laugh. Your Grace cannot possibly wish to involve yourself in household discipline. I already am involved. His voice lowered. You involved me when you made me a witness. The corridor seemed to narrow around them. Beatrice stood very still beside the desk, the two halves of her card hidden inside her hand. For the first time since he had entered Merrow House, Sebastian saw something in her expression that was not composure. It was disbelief, fragile and unwilling. She had been defended before in small ways, perhaps. Excused. Pitied. Managed. But not believed without being required to perform her suffering. Lady Octavia's mouth hardened. Miss Elloway, you may retire to your room until I decide what is best. No, Beatrice said. The word surprised everyone, including herself. It was quiet, but it was whole. She placed the copied notes in a neat stack, set the pen down, and lifted her chin. I shall finish no more letters today. Edmund whispered her name, but she did not look at him. The Duke saw it then. The first severing. Not of paper, but of hope misplaced. Lady Octavia drew herself up. Take care, Miss Elloway. Beatrice met her eyes. I am beginning to, my lady. A silence followed. This time, it did not belong to Lady Octavia. It belonged to the woman she had tried to make small, and to the man who had seen the attempt fail. By 10 o'clock that evening, Beatrice Elloway had learned how little space a woman required when she was no longer wanted. Her room at the back of Merrow House had always been narrow, with a sloped ceiling, a washstand, a small grate that smoked in bad weather, and a window overlooking the mews instead of the square. For 3 years she had called it sufficient. That word had been useful to her. Sufficient wages. Sufficient respect. Sufficient warmth. Sufficient distance from hunger. Now, as she folded her plain gowns into a worn leather trunk, sufficient seemed like another name for slowly disappearing. The two halves of her calling card lay on the coverlet beside her gloves. She had placed them together once, then drawn them apart again. The tear could not be persuaded to vanish. Neither could the sound of Lady Octavia's voice, smooth as cream poured over a blade, nor the fainter wound of Edmund saying nothing that mattered. Downstairs, Merrow House continued as if no life had shifted inside its walls. A footman crossed the hall. A maid carried fresh candles. Somewhere below, Lady Octavia's guests laughed over dinner, their voices rising through the floorboards in soft, harmless waves. Beatrice had copied their invitations, remembered their allergies, corrected their titles, and smoothed every passage by which they entered the house. None of them would remember whether she left by the front door or the servants' entrance. That should have made departure easier. Instead, it made her very still. A knock came at 10:30. Not a servant's tap. Not timid. Controlled. Come in, Beatrice said. Lady Octavia entered without waiting for the words to finish. She had changed into a dinner gown of deep violet silk. Pearls shone at her throat, pale and watchful. In her hand was a small purse of dark kid leather. Beatrice rose. My lady. The Marchioness looked at the trunk, then at the folded gowns. How sensible. I had hoped you would not make this vulgar. Leaving quietly has never been difficult for women in my position. Your position, Lady Octavia said, is exactly what you forgot this afternoon. Beatrice did not answer. She had discovered in the last few hours that silence could be servitude or strength, depending on who owned it. Lady Octavia crossed to the dressing table and placed the purse there. It landed with the small, heavy sound of coins. 3 months' wages. More than you are owed. You will depart tomorrow after breakfast, by the side door. I will tell the household that your aunt has taken ill and requires you in York. My aunt is not ill. No. But illness is more respectable than dismissal. Beatrice looked at the purse. And what will you tell society? That you were overcome by a foolish attachment and that I chose mercy over exposure. For the first time that day, Beatrice laughed. It was quiet, and not at all amused. Lady Octavia's eyes narrowed. Take care. I have been told that already. You have also been defended by a duke who knows nothing of you. Do not mistake that for safety. Men of great rank are often briefly entertained by injustice, especially when it costs them nothing. The words found their mark because they resembled fear Beatrice had already entertained. Sebastian Vale had stood in the corridor and made Lady Octavia pause. That did not mean he would remember Beatrice tomorrow. A duke's conscience could afford gestures. A woman without money could not build her life upon them. Lady Octavia stepped closer. You will leave my son's name out of your letters. You will not write to him. You will not present yourself at any house where he may be received. You will not repeat whatever girlish interpretation you placed upon his courtesy. His courtesy, Beatrice said. Yes. Edmund is kind. He can be careless with that kindness. Beatrice thought of winter light in the library, of Edmund's hand resting near hers without quite touching, of the low words that had sounded like courage because she had wanted them to. She had mistaken softness for honor. That was her shame, but it was not her crime. Did he ask you to say this? She asked. Lady Octavia smiled. He does not need to. I am his mother. Then he has less need of a wife than I supposed. The Marchioness's face hardened. You will not speak of marriage in connection with my son. No, Beatrice said. I will not. She picked up the purse and held it out. Keep this, my lady. Do not be theatrical. I am being practical. If I take it, you will call it proof that I was bought. If I refuse it, you will call me ungrateful. I prefer the accusation that leaves my hands empty. Lady Octavia did not take the purse at first. Beatrice set it on the dressing table again, not gently enough to be mistaken for surrender. The coins inside shifted. The sound pleased her more than it should have. You are very proud for a woman with no protection, Lady Octavia said. No. I am simply tired of paying for shelter with pieces of myself. A flicker moved through the Marchioness's expression, too quick to name. Then it vanished beneath contempt. You will regret this. Very likely. York will not save you from gossip. Perhaps not. Beatrice turned back to her trunk and closed the lid. But it will give me a door that is mine to open. Lady Octavia remained for another moment, as if waiting for Beatrice to weaken into apology. When no apology came, she left the room with the purse still on the dressing table and the air colder behind her. Beatrice did not sleep. Near midnight, when the house had quieted, another sound came. A softer knock this time, uncertain enough that she knew who stood outside before he spoke. Beatrice. She closed her eyes. Hearing her name in Edmund's voice after she had packed her life into a trunk felt like finding a pressed flower in a book one had meant to burn. She opened the door only because leaving without this conversation would allow memory to make him kinder than he had been. Lord Edmund stood in the passage with a candle in one hand and misery arranged across his handsome face. He wore no coat. His waistcoat was unbuttoned at the throat, giving him the look of a man who had suffered deeply while remaining perfectly comfortable. I had to see you, he said. No, my lord. You chose to see me after everyone else had gone to bed. He flinched. Don't call me that. It is your title. Not between us. There is no us. The words left her before pain could soften them. Edmund glanced down the passage. Even now, he feared witnesses more than wounding her. I never meant for mother to speak so harshly. Yet you let her finish. You don't understand what she is like. I have lived in her house for 3 years. That isn't what I mean. He set the candle on a narrow table and lowered his voice. She controls everything. The settlements, the invitations, father's old connections. If I defy her publicly, she can make life impossible. For you? For both of us. Beatrice looked at him for a long moment. There it is. The generous lie. His brow drew together. I'm trying to protect you. No. You are trying to protect your comfort and place my name beneath it. Edmund reached inside his waistcoat and drew out a folded paper. I can arrange something. An income. Not charity. A regard. You could live with your aunt, and I could visit when circumstances allow. The passage seemed to recede from her. The candle flame trembled in the draught, though no window was open. Beatrice looked at the paper, then at the man holding it. He truly believed he was offering kindness. That was what made it unbearable. You would make me a secret and call it regard. It wouldn't be like that. What would it be like? He had no answer. She stepped back into her room, crossed to the small desk, and gathered the keys Lady Octavia had entrusted to her, the correspondence drawer, the household invitation book, the locked cabinet where unanswered notes waited in strict order. She placed them in Edmund's free hand. Then she added the account book she had balanced every Thursday for 3 years. Give those to your mother. Beatrice, please. I will not be kept in shadow by a man too frightened to name me in daylight. He went pale. She expected anger. She would have preferred it. Instead, his eyes filled with the helpless sorrow of someone who wanted forgiveness without deserving it. I did care for you, he whispered. I know, she said. That was the small tragedy. He had cared. Just not enough to become honorable. She closed the door before he could say her name again. At dawn, Beatrice left Merrow House by the front entrance. She had considered the side door, then rejected it. A hired cab waited beyond the steps. The sky over Mayfair held the faint pearl color of a day not yet committed to brightness. Her trunk was strapped behind, and in her reticule lay the torn card, her aunt's direction in York, and enough money of her own to carry her north. As the cab moved away, she did not look back. She did not see the upper curtain shift in Lady Octavia's room. She did not know that an hour later the Duke of Alderwick would arrive and find her chamber empty, the card tray disturbed, and the official story already prepared. She only knew that for the first time in 3 years, she was leaving a house poorer than when she entered it, and somehow less owned. By 8 o'clock that morning, Sebastian Vale understood that Merrow House had been rearranged overnight to erase one woman. Her room had been stripped of warmth before the ashes were cold. The little writing desk stood bare. The narrow bed had been made with such severity that it seemed no one had ever slept there, and the window above the mews had been pushed open to let out the faint scent of lavender soap and sealing wax. Only one thing remained out of place. On the floor near the leg of the desk lay a smear of black sand from an overturned pounce pot, as if someone had packed in haste and then paused long enough to master herself. Sebastian stood in the doorway and felt an irritation so cold that it left no room for display. Lady Octavia's housekeeper hovered behind him, pale with discomfort. Miss Elloway departed early, Your Grace. Her aunt in York is unwell, I believe. Do you? He asked. The housekeeper lowered her eyes. Servants knew many things and survived by knowing which truths not to hold too openly. That is what my lady instructed the household to understand. Sebastian turned. Then I shall ask your ladyship which part of the story was meant for servants and which part was meant for me. He found Lady Octavia in the breakfast room, seated before untouched toast and a silver coffee pot. Lord Edmund stood by the window with the appearance of a man who had slept badly and deserved worse. Miss Lavinia Say was not present, though a pale blue ribbon lay on the back of a chair, left there with the carelessness of someone certain a maid would rescue it. Lady Octavia did not rise. Your Grace. You are early. Miss Elloway was earlier. The Marchioness lifted her cup. A family matter called her north. It is fortunate, perhaps. Yesterday's scene made her continued position awkward. Yesterday's scene was not made by Miss Elloway. No one wishes to prolong unpleasantness. You have already begun. Lady Octavia's gaze sharpened. I am afraid I do not follow. A footman in your hall informed me, with extraordinary reluctance, that Miss Elloway had been dismissed for taking a brooch from Lady Dalrymple's cloak. Your servants are badly trained liars, Lady Merrow. They look ashamed when repeating your inventions. Edmund turned from the window. A brooch. Lady Octavia set down her cup. Gossip breeds without permission. I cannot answer for every servant's tongue. You can answer for the fact that Lady Dalrymple's brooch is presently pinned to her shawl. I sent a note before coming here. Her maid confirmed it was never missing. For the first time, the Marchioness had no ready reply. Sebastian let the silence remain. He had learned long ago that people who governed others through discomfort feared stillness when it was not theirs to command. Edmund looked from his mother to the Duke. "Mother, you didn't say there was such talk." "Because there is nothing to discuss." "There is," Sebastian said. "There is the falsehood. There is the girl you humiliated. There is the reason your son cannot look at either of us." Edmund flushed. "Your Grace, I know I handled matters poorly." Poorly is a mild word for standing by while a woman is made smaller for believing you honorable. Lady Octavia's hand struck the table softly, not enough to be loud, just enough to claim the room. "You overstep, Duke or not. Miss Elloway was a dependent in this house. She developed hopes that could not be rewarded. I ended them before she destroyed herself. You ended them in front of guests. Mercy is not always gentle. Do not dress cruelty in the clothing of mercy. It fits badly." Edmund breathed out as if struck by the words, though they had not been meant to comfort him. Sebastian removed the folded half of Beatrice's card from his inner pocket and laid it upon the table. It looked impossibly small against the white cloth, but Lady Octavia's eyes went to it at once. "I will ask once," he said. "Where did she go?" "I told you. York. To Mrs. Isolde Penrith." The Marchioness's composure flickered. That was answer enough. "You see," Sebastian said quietly, "she did not need to confide in me for me to listen." Edmund stepped forward. "I should write to her." "You should have spoken yesterday." "I know." "No," Sebastian said. "You regret being seen. That is not the same as knowing." Lady Octavia rose then, dignity assembled like armor. "You have made your opinion plain. Since Miss Elloway is no concern of yours, I suggest we end this impropriety." Sebastian picked up the half-card and returned it to his pocket. "When a woman is insulted before me and then slandered after she leaves, the matter becomes my concern." "And what do you intend to do?" "Discover how far the lie has travelled." Her smile returned, thin and dangerous. "London is not kind to women who invite a duke's attention without the shield of rank." "Then I shall be careful with my attention," he said. "You should have been careful with your contempt." He left before she could answer. By noon, Sebastian had confirmed 3 things. Lady Dalrymple's brooch had never been missing. 2 invitations written in Beatrice's hand had been altered after sealing, changing a dinner list in a way that made her appear presumptuous. A folded letter, once kept in the small desk upstairs, had vanished. His solicitor, Mr. Harcourt, received these facts in a private office off Lincoln's Inn Fields with the restrained concern of a man accustomed to sins committed in excellent penmanship. A forged letter would be an efficient weapon, Harcourt said. Especially if the lady once wrote anything candid. "Everyone has written something candid," Sebastian replied. "Only cowards turn it into a noose." "Your Grace wishes me to pursue this formally." "Not yet." "Quietly. Speak to Lady Dalrymple's maid. Find which servant carried notes from Merrow House this morning. And send no man near Miss Elloway who might frighten her or imply she has done wrong." Harcourt bowed. "Of course." Sebastian returned to Alderwick House in Grosvenor Square to find his younger sister in the morning room, dressed in grey silk, reading a newspaper as if it had personally disappointed her. Lady Helena Vale had been widowed for 4 years and had since developed a calm contempt for social nonsense that Sebastian valued more than most parliamentary speeches. She looked up. "You have the face of a man about to inconvenience several powerful women. One powerful woman has inconvenienced justice first. How refreshing. Is this about the companion whose name Lady Merrow's callers are already pretending not to mention?" "Her name is Miss Beatrice Elloway." Helena set the paper aside. "Then it is already worse than gossip. You used her name carefully." He crossed to the hearth, though there was no fire lit. "She has gone to York. Lady Merrow has begun sending stories after her? And you wish to follow?" "I intend to." Helena studied him for a moment. She knew him too well to ask whether sentiment had overtaken judgment. His affections, where they existed, tended to move slowly and root deeply. His sense of injustice, however, could cross a county before breakfast. "You cannot arrive at a single lady's aunt's house alone and expect society to call it noble," she said. "I know." Then I shall come. He turned. I had hoped you would. No, you had decided I would and were arranging how to make it sound like my suggestion. You are welcome to resent me from the railway carriage. Helena rose. I will. Also, Sebastian, do not rescue her so thoroughly that she loses the right to rescue herself. The warning struck more deeply than she could know. He thought of Beatrice in the corridor, steady, wounded, unwilling to be made an object of pity. That is not my intention. Men rarely intend to be insufferable. It hasn't stopped them yet. This time, he almost smiled. We leave this afternoon. For York. For York. Before dusk, their trunks were sent ahead, their seats arranged, and Mr. Harcourt's first inquiry set in motion. At the station, steam veiled the platform and blurred the lamps into halos. Porters shouted. Wheels clattered. Ladies gathered their skirts away from the damp boards while gentlemen pretended travel had not made them irritable. Sebastian stood beside Helena and touched the folded half-card inside his coat. It was not a keepsake. He told himself that twice. It was a reminder. A wrong had been done in a room full of witnesses, and the woman wronged had walked away with more grace than any of them deserved. As the northbound train shuddered and began to move, another letter was already travelling ahead by faster hands. It bore no honest signature, only a seal pressed from Merrow House wax and words cut from an older tenderness until they looked like ambition. By the time Sebastian Vale crossed the first miles out of London, the lie was racing toward York ahead of him. York received Beatrice Elloway with bells, damp stone, and whispers that arrived before she had taken off her gloves. The city did not glitter like Mayfair. It held itself older, graver, with walls that had watched kings pass and streets narrow enough to make a carriage wheel scrape if the driver lost patience. To Beatrice, stepping down before Mrs. Isolde Penrith's modest house near Bootham, it felt at first like mercy. Then her aunt opened the door herself, took one look at Beatrice's face, and said, "Well, you've either lost a post or refused a proposal. Come in before the neighbours decide which version is more entertaining." Beatrice laughed because she would have cried otherwise. Isolde Penrith was her mother's elder sister, a widow of 58 with silver at her temples, sharp black eyes, and a talent for making tenderness sound like criticism. She kissed Beatrice's cheek, declared her too thin, scolded the cabman for bruising the trunk, and ordered tea as though tea could repair social injury if brewed strongly enough. By noon, Beatrice had told enough of the truth to make her aunt quiet. Not all of it. She said Lady Octavia had dismissed her. She said Lord Edmund had lacked courage. She did not repeat the exact words spoken over the torn card, because some humiliations could not be released into a room until the room had proven itself worthy of holding them. Isolde did not press. She merely took the two torn halves from Beatrice's palm, fitted them together, and looked for a long moment at the jagged line through the printed name. There are women, she said, who think tearing paper is the same as changing fact. It changed enough. Only if you let the tear decide what remains. Beatrice looked away. Her aunt's parlour smelled of coal smoke, lemon polish, and the lavender sachets tucked into every drawer. It was not grand, but every object in it seemed to belong by invitation rather than permission. A small pianoforte stood by the window. A bookshelf sagged under sermons, novels, and account books. On the mantel sat a miniature of Isolde's late husband, Captain Penrith, whose painted expression suggested he had lost every argument of his married life and been improved by it. Beatrice had been given the best room, though Isolde insisted the fire had already been lit before the letter came. It had not. The grate still smoked from haste. That nearly undid her. Kindness was more dangerous when no one asked gratitude for it. The next morning, Isolde placed a stack of subscription papers before her. If London has made you useless, we shall hide it by making you useful. Aunt. Don't aunt me in that tone. Mrs. Markham has misplaced half the pledges for the Widow's Coal Fund, Mrs. Bell has invited two ladies who do not speak, and the Dean's wife has written her title so badly that no one can tell whether she expects precedence or martyrdom. You have a gift for rescuing foolish paper. Use it. Beatrice looked at the lists. Names, pledges, addresses, ranks, obligations. The old work. Yet here, the work did not feel like a chain. No one expected her to disappear behind it. By afternoon, she was seated beside Isolde at the long table in the Assembly Committee room, helping prepare for a charitable subscription meeting. York ladies came and went with baskets, papers, opinions, and the serene confidence that charity required nearly as much hierarchy as Parliament. Beatrice corrected a double invitation, softened a quarrel about seating, and found a missing pledge beneath a pile of hymn sheets. She had almost forgotten the ache in her chest when two ladies by the window lowered their voices. Almost. That is the young woman from Merrow House. The one who followed Lord Edmund. So they say. Lady Merrow acted with great restraint. The words were soft, but they had been aimed to carry. Beatrice's pen paused only once. Isolde glanced at her, then at the women. Mrs. Pritchard, she called across the room, if you mean to repeat London gossip, do raise your voice. Charity should never be conducted with poor projection. The women flushed. Beatrice bent over the ledger, but warmth rose behind her eyes. You need not defend me, she murmured. Nonsense. I defend good manners. You happen to be nearby. Before Beatrice could answer, the footman entered with a salver. Isolde's house did not employ enough servants for ceremony, but for public meetings she borrowed dignity where she could. On the salver lay 2 calling cards. Isolde picked up the first, read it, and went very still. Well, she said. York grows interesting. Beatrice looked up. The room seemed to gather itself around the silence. Isolde handed her the card. Heavy cream stock. Black engraved letters. Sebastian Vale, Duke of Alderwick. Beneath it lay another card, smaller, elegant, and proper. Lady Helena Vale. Beatrice felt the edges of the room sharpen. She had known he might make inquiries. She had not believed he would come. Men of his rank did not follow dismissed companions across 200 miles of English railway because an insult had disturbed their afternoon. They sent notes. They sent money through intermediaries. They forgot. There must be some mistake, Beatrice said. A duke's card is rarely a mistake, Isolde replied. An inconvenience, perhaps. Occasionally a thunderclap. The footman cleared his throat. His Grace and Lady Helena are at Mrs. Whitcomb's inn. A note accompanies the cards. Isolde opened it, read, and passed it to Beatrice without comment. The message was brief. His Grace requested the honour of calling at Mrs. Penrith's convenience, with Lady Helena present, and would not presume upon Miss Elloway's time unless Miss Elloway wished to receive him. Beatrice read the last line twice. Unless Miss Elloway wished. She had not realized how long it had been since anyone in authority had phrased her presence as a choice. Mrs. Pritchard whispered again, less successfully this time. Beatrice heard the words Duke, London, and companion. The room did too. Isolde folded her hands. Shall I refuse him? Beatrice wanted to say yes. Refusal would be safe. It would protect her from becoming a curiosity, from gratitude, from the strange and frightening memory of the Duke's hand returning the torn paper as if it mattered. But the note did not command. It did not summon. It waited. That made refusal feel less like safety and more like fear dressed carefully. No, she said. Her voice was low, but it held. If he crossed England, let him at least cross the threshold properly. Isolde's mouth softened by 1 degree. That is better. The call was arranged for 4 o'clock. By then, the city had made its own preparations. A carriage slowed twice outside Isolde's house. A milliner's apprentice invented a reason to pass the door. Mrs. Pritchard's niece delivered a basket no one had requested. Beatrice dressed in her plain grey gown, the one best suited to looking neither injured nor hopeful, and pinned her hair with steady fingers. The torn calling card remained in her reticule. She told herself it was there because it was evidence. Not because part of her wanted him to ask about it. At exactly 4, the Duke of Alderwick entered Mrs. Penrith's parlour with Lady Helena Vale beside him. His bow to Isolde was exact. His greeting to Beatrice was neither intimate nor distant. It gave society nothing to punish and Beatrice nothing to fear. Miss Elloway, he said. Mrs. Penrith. Thank you for receiving us. Lady Helena took Beatrice's hand with gentle firmness. My brother has a talent for appearing severe when he is merely concerned. I hope you won't hold his face against him. Helena, the Duke said. There. That is the face. Beatrice almost smiled. Isolde did not bother hiding hers. The first few minutes belonged to propriety. Tea was poured. Health was asked after. York was praised without exaggeration. Then Isolde, who had never allowed etiquette to become a prison, set down her cup. Your Grace, you did not come all this way to admire my curtains. No, he said. His gaze moved to Beatrice, and there it stayed, not heavily, but with a steadiness that asked permission before proceeding. I did not come to take you back to London, Miss Elloway. I came to ask what you wish done with the truth. The words entered her more quietly than comfort and more deeply than defense. The truth rarely asks my preference. Then it has been badly handled. She looked at him, searching for pity and finding none. That unsettled her most of all. If I answer, I may not answer as you expect. I would rather hear what you mean than what you think a duke expects. The parlour held its breath. Outside, carriage wheels passed over wet stone. Beatrice placed her cup in its saucer before her hand could tremble. I do not wish to be rescued into another person's story, she said. I do not wish to be used as proof of your generosity. I do not wish Lord Edmund shamed merely because he was weak. But I will not allow Lady Octavia to make me the villain of a promise her son was too afraid to keep. Something in the Duke's face changed. Not softness. Recognition. Then we begin there. Begin? Isolde asked. There is already a letter in York, he said. A false one, I believe. It was sent from London ahead of me. By tomorrow, someone will try to make Miss Elloway answer for words she did not write, or words stolen from a meaning she never gave them. Beatrice's hand closed over her reticule. The torn card pressed against her palm through the fabric. How do you know? Because Lady Merrow is thorough, he said. And because cruelty, once challenged, prefers to arrive early. The safety of York shifted beneath Beatrice's feet. She had not escaped the room in Mayfair. Not yet. The room had simply learned how to follow her. The false letter arrived folded like a courtesy and carried itself like a verdict. It was delivered to Mrs. Isolde Penrith's parlour the next morning by a boy from the assembly rooms, who claimed it had been left among the papers for the Widow's Coal Fund and was thought to concern Miss Elloway. That last phrase had already done its work. Thought to concern. Not addressed. Not sealed for her. Not private. A thing meant to be found by the wrong eyes before the right hands could claim it. Beatrice stood beside her aunt's small round table while the Duke of Alderwick placed the letter upon the green baize blotter and did not touch it again. Lady Helena sat near the hearth with her gloves still on, her expression mild enough to calm a room and sharp enough to cut through foolishness. Isolde had locked the parlour door herself, then unlocked it again after one look from her niece. Very well, she had said. No locked doors. We shall not give York a Gothic novel by breakfast. Beatrice wished she could laugh. The sheet before her made laughter feel like an old language. It was her handwriting, or close enough to unsettle the body before the mind could object. Certain loops were hers. Certain slants resembled letters she had written in haste at Merrow House. One phrase struck her at once because she had written it months ago in a private note never sent to anyone, then copied again in a page she had torn and kept only briefly before shame made her destroy it. I cannot bear to be hidden forever. Now it sat in the centre of a page arranged to say something uglier. That she had pressed Lord Edmund for marriage. That she had threatened to reveal private attentions. That she had followed rank with calculation rather than hope. Her own longing had been stolen, trimmed, and dressed as ambition. Beatrice reached for the edge of the table. This is not mine. The words were true, but too thin for the damage in front of her. Some of it is, she added, because honesty had become the last room in which she could stand. The phrase about being hidden. I wrote that once. Not to him. Not like this. The Duke's gaze did not leave her face. A sentence can be true and still be used to tell a lie. That distinction rarely survives gossip. Then we must give it witnesses. Isolde drew the letter toward her with 2 fingers, as if it smelled unpleasant. This paper is expensive. Better than mine, which offends me. It is not local. No, the Duke said. The watermark is from the stationer Lady Merrow uses in Bond Street. Lady Helena leaned forward. And the wax? He turned the folded edge carefully, showing the broken seal. Dark red, pressed too hastily, with only a partial mark remaining. Not enough for a full crest, but the color and mixture are familiar. Merrow House uses wax with a darker resin. I noticed it on correspondence yesterday. Beatrice looked at him despite herself. You notice the wax? I notice what people assume is beneath attention. The answer was simple. It should not have warmed her. Yet after years of being useful because she noticed everything, hearing a duke confess to the same habit felt strangely intimate, as if he had stepped into a narrow corridor of her life where no one else had ever cared to walk. She looked away before the feeling could show. Who has seen it? Isolde asked. Mrs. Pritchard, certainly. She brought the matter to the committee clerk with great moral discomfort and very little delay. Mrs. Bell may have heard. By this evening, half the assembly rooms will know there is a letter. By this evening, Beatrice repeated. The assembly is tomorrow. The Duke looked at her. Yes. No one spoke for several seconds. Outside, York moved as if nothing had changed. Hooves struck wet stone. A woman called to a child. Somewhere in the house, a kettle hissed. Beatrice stared at the letter and felt the strange cruelty of it. A whole life could be reduced to one sheet if the sheet reached the right drawing rooms. Her years of work, her father's name, her aunt's welcome, the shred of dignity she had carried from London. All of it could be made to answer for one forged arrangement of ink. I did hope, she said at last. Her voice was quiet. That made it harder. I hoped Edmund would be braver than he was. I hoped his kindness meant courage waiting for the proper hour. I hoped, when he spoke softly to me, that softness might become honor. It did not. That is humiliating enough without someone making it wicked. Lady Helena's face softened. Isolde made a small sound, then swallowed it. The Duke remained still, and that stillness steadied her more than pity would have done. Miss Elloway, he said, to trust the unworthy is not a crime. She closed her eyes for a moment. It feels like one. Because they have arranged the punishment as if you committed it. Her eyes opened. The words entered her like a hand placed beneath the weight she had been carrying. Not removing it. Not claiming it. Simply proving that someone else could see its shape. If I ask Mr. Harcourt to pursue the stationer, the seal, and the messenger, he continued, I will do so only with your permission. I will not turn your life into an investigation you did not choose. Beatrice almost smiled, though her throat ached. Your Grace, my life has been an investigation since I entered service. Every glance asks what I am doing there. Every kindness is examined for motive. Every mistake is weighed against my station. Then let this one be conducted for you instead of against you. And if I refuse, then I will burn nothing, reveal nothing, and leave York when you ask it. The answer frightened her because she believed it. She had expected command wrapped in courtesy. Instead, he offered obedience to a woman society considered displaced. Isolde sat back in her chair. That is either very noble or very inconvenient. Lady Helena said, with Sebastian, it is often both. The Duke ignored his sister, though a faint change near his eye suggested he had heard. Beatrice looked again at the forged letter. She wished it were entirely false. That would have made anger clean. But the weapon had been made from a true bruise, and that gave it power. She had wanted to be named. She had wanted to be chosen in daylight. She had wanted the impossible and let Edmund's weakness teach her to call her desire shame. Slowly, she reached into her reticule and took out the torn calling card. She placed it beside the letter. Paper beside paper. One torn by a woman who wanted to lower her. One twisted by someone who wanted to soil her. The sight did not break her. It clarified her. You may investigate the source, she said. But not for the purpose of proving I am innocent enough to be pitied. The Duke inclined his head. For what purpose, then? For the purpose of proving that I am not available for rewriting. Isolde's eyes shone, though she would have denied it under oath. Lady Helena smiled openly. The Duke looked at Beatrice as if the room had quieted around a bell only he had expected to hear. Then that is the purpose. Later, when Isolde and Lady Helena had gone to speak with the boy who brought the letter, Beatrice found herself near the parlour window with the Duke several feet away, close enough for conversation and far enough for propriety. Rain had begun, fine and silver against the glass. The assembly notice lay open on the table behind them. "You need not attend tomorrow," he said. "I know. Some will come only to watch whether you falter. I know that as well." He turned slightly toward her. "Knowing does not require you to offer them the spectacle." "No," she said. "But absence will become a confession before supper." His jaw tightened. People believe too easily what flatters their cruelty. And they doubt too easily what asks them to be fair. A silence passed between them, not empty, not comfortable. It held the memory of the corridor at Merrow House, the returned card, the distance he kept because her reputation mattered more than his impulse. Beatrice watched the rain bead on the window and felt him beside her like a question she was not ready to answer. When Lady Octavia tore the card, she said, "I thought the worst part was that everyone saw it. Now I think the worst part would be if I spent the rest of my life hiding from rooms because one room was cruel." He did not speak at once. When he did, his voice was low. "If you attend, I will be there." She looked at him. "Beside me?" "If you permit it." "Not before me." "No." His answer came without hesitation. "Not before you." Something in her chest eased and grew more dangerous at once. "Then I shall attend." The rain darkened the street beyond the glass. Somewhere in York, a rumour was already dressing itself for tomorrow evening, fastening gloves, practicing sympathy, preparing to smile. Beatrice pressed her fingers once against the reticule where the torn card had rested and let them fall. She had run from one drawing-room. She would not run from the next. The York Assembly rooms had never seemed so full of people pretending not to stare. Beatrice knew the shape of that performance. It began with a glance quickly lowered, then a whisper behind a fan, then the exaggerated warmth of someone who wished to appear kind while waiting for disaster. The room glowed with candlelight and polished brass. Musicians tuned at the far end. Ladies in satin and silk gathered beneath the chandeliers like flowers trained to lean toward rank. Gentlemen stood in clusters near the doors, discussing weather, horses, and politics with the strained attention of men who had already heard a better subject moving through the room. Beatrice entered with Mrs. Isolde Penrith on one side and Lady Helena Vale on the other. Sebastian Vale, Duke of Alderwick, followed at a proper distance, neither claiming her nor abandoning her. That restraint became the first thing people noticed. The second was that Beatrice did not look ruined. She wore her plain grey gown with fresh cuffs Isolde had insisted upon sewing that morning, and her hair was arranged simply beneath a narrow ribbon. There were no jewels to mock, no grand attempt to appear what she was not. In her reticule lay the torn calling card. On the committee table near the subscription book lay the false letter, folded again after Isolde had returned it to the clerk with a warning that any further mishandling of private correspondence would be remembered by every respectable woman in York. The warning had not stopped the whispers. It had merely improved their manners. Mrs. Pritchard, round, pink, and trembling with the burden of information she longed to distribute, approached before the first quadrille began. "Miss Elloway," she said, loudly enough for the nearest group to hear. "How brave of you to come." Beatrice inclined her head. "How charitable of you to call it bravery." Isolde coughed into her glove. Lady Helena's mouth remained perfectly still, which Beatrice suspected was the greater effort. Mrs. Pritchard flushed. "I meant only that some women might prefer privacy when there has been confusion." "Privacy is best preserved before a letter is carried into committee rooms," Beatrice said. The words were quiet. They travelled anyway. A gentleman near the fireplace turned. Mrs. Bell, who had pretended to study the musicians, stopped pretending. Mrs. Pritchard's eyes flicked toward the Duke, then back to Beatrice. One cannot ignore a document that suggests a young lady may have misunderstood her position. There it was. Not accusation, not openly. Something more dangerous. Concern dressed for company. Beatrice felt the old heat rise in her face, but beneath it came something steadier. Yesterday, the letter had seemed like a blade placed against her throat. Tonight, in the eyes of these people, she saw its true nature. It was paper. Paper required readers to become powerful. My position, she said, has been explained to me by many people recently. I find the explanations reveal more about the speaker than about me. A faint stir moved through the room. The Duke stepped closer. Only one pace. Beatrice sensed it rather than saw it. She lifted her hand, barely enough for him to notice. Not yet. He stopped. The gesture was small, but its effect moved through her like breath returned. He had understood. Mrs. Pritchard pressed her lips together. Then you deny the contents. I deny the arrangement of them. That sounds very clever. Truth often does when one has been listening to gossip. Somewhere behind Mrs. Pritchard, a young woman gave a startled laugh and then smothered it. The musicians lowered their bows. Lord Alderwick's name passed in a whisper along the wall, though he had not spoken. Mrs. Pritchard took a folded paper from her reticule. Not the whole letter, Beatrice saw at once. A portion copied out, or perhaps torn from a covering sheet. The movement was too eager. There are phrases here that appear to be in your own hand. Beatrice looked at the paper, and her stomach tightened. The room knew the moment had come. The assembly no longer pretended to be an assembly. It had become a court without law, a chapel without mercy. Yes, Beatrice said. One phrase was mine. The admission struck more sharply than denial would have done. Mrs. Pritchard blinked. Then you concede, I concede that I once wrote that I could not bear to be hidden forever. Silence. Full and immediate. Even the candles seemed to hold themselves upright. Beatrice heard Isolde inhale. She heard Lady Helena shift the silk of her skirt. She did not turn toward the Duke. If she did, she might borrow courage instead of using her own. I wrote those words, Beatrice continued, not as a threat, not as a bargain, and not as a scheme to secure a marriage above my station. I wrote them because every woman in this room knows there are houses where a lady may be useful, intelligent, loyal, and still be expected to vanish the moment her feelings inconvenience those with titles. Mrs. Pritchard's mouth opened. No sound came. Beatrice's hand tightened once on her reticule, then relaxed. If ambition means refusing to be hidden, then perhaps I am guilty of surviving. The words did not ring. They did not need to. They settled. One woman by the window lowered her fan. Another looked away first, not from contempt, but discomfort. Beatrice felt the room change by a degree. Not safe. Never safe. But less certain of its own righteousness. The Duke moved then, not in front of her, but beside her. His shoulder remained a careful distance from hers. His voice, when it came, was low enough that the room strained to hear it and strong enough that no one missed a syllable. Mrs. Pritchard, who gave you that paper? Mrs. Pritchard clutched it. It was left with the committee materials. That is not an answer. Your Grace, I cannot be expected to know every messenger. No. But you can be expected to distinguish charity from malice before repeating either. Her face reddened. I acted out of concern for society. Society has survived worse dangers than an honest woman with wounded pride. A murmur passed through the room. The Duke's gaze dropped to Mrs. Pritchard's gloved hand. Beatrice followed it and noticed what he had noticed. A small fragment of wax clung to the edge of the folded paper, dark red and glossy, with a cut impression of a crest not fully visible. Someone had sliced the seal away from another sheet and left part of it attached. The Duke did not reach for it. He merely looked. Mrs. Pritchard saw his attention and closed her fingers. Too late. His expression did not alter, yet Beatrice felt the quiet turn of his mind. A clue had stepped into candlelight. You will keep that paper safe, he said. It may prove more useful than you intended. Mrs. Pritchard swallowed. I have done nothing wrong. Then you should welcome precision. The musicians, desperate for normalcy, began a country dance. No one joined at once. Sound returned slowly, like water moving around a stone. Conversation resumed in broken pieces. Mrs. Pritchard retreated toward Mrs. Bell, but not with triumph. Beatrice stood very still until Lady Helena touched her elbow. You were magnificent, she said softly. No, Beatrice answered. I was terrified. Isolde came to her other side. Most magnificent women are. They simply refuse to give terror the best share. The Duke heard that. For the first time that evening, his stern mouth nearly yielded. Beatrice looked at him then, and the room with its candles and whispers fell back a little. You saw something, she said. On the paper. A seal mark. Cut from a different fold. Dark Merrow wax, I believe. Believe. Enough to ask better questions. Not enough to end it. No. His honesty steadied her more than false comfort would have done. Not yet. A gentleman approached to request Lady Helena's hand for the dance, only to falter under the Duke's glance and redirect himself toward someone safer. Beatrice almost laughed, then found she could not. The courage that had held her upright began to drain from her hands. She turned before the room could see. I need air. Isolde began to move, but the Duke spoke first. Mrs. Penrith, with your permission, Lady Helena, and I will accompany Miss Elloway to the anteroom. The door will remain open. Even in concern, he remembered propriety. The detail touched Beatrice in a place already bruised. They withdrew to the small anteroom beside the main hall, where the noise of the assembly softened behind them. Beatrice stood near a narrow table arranged with empty glasses and pressed one hand against its edge. Her body had waited until privacy to tremble. She disliked that. She disliked that he might see it. I am not sorry, she said, though no one had asked. I would think less of you if you were. The Duke stood several feet away. Lady Helena remained by the open door, speaking quietly with Isolde and preventing any curious guest from mistaking retreat for collapse. They will still talk, Beatrice said. Yes. Some will say I admitted too much. Some people call honesty excessive because they have never tried it. That drew a tired breath from her that was almost amusement. She looked toward the light spilling from the assembly room. When Lady Octavia hears of this, she will not retreat. No, he said. She will come. Beatrice closed her eyes. The thought should have frightened her more than it did. Instead, it clarified the road ahead. The insult had not ended in Mayfair. The lie had not ended in York. It was all one thread, pulled by a hand that expected her to unravel. She opened her eyes again. Then let her. The Duke's gaze held hers, grave and unwavering. In the assembly room beyond, the dance finally began, skirts moving, shoes brushing the floor, society trying to recover its rhythm after a woman it had expected to shame had chosen instead to speak. Lady Octavia Cresswell arrived in York with the punctual cruelty of a woman who believed delay belonged to people beneath her. By 11 o'clock the morning after the assembly, her carriage stopped before Mrs. Isolde Penrith's house near Bootham, its black lacquer shining beneath a thin veil of rain. The footman who climbed down wore Merrow colours, and that alone made the maid across the street pause with a basket in her hands. Beatrice saw the carriage from the parlour window before the bell rang. Her fingers, which had been sorting subscription receipts, stilled over the paper. She had expected Lady Octavia to come. Expectation did not make the sight easier. Isolde looked up from her writing desk. If she has brought London manners all this way, we shall charge her for storage. Lady Helena, seated by the hearth with a book she had not turned a page of in 20 minutes, closed it calmly. My brother should be here within the hour. He went to meet the man who carried the letter. Then Lady Merrow chose her moment well, Isolde said. Beatrice withdrew from the window. She always does. The bell sounded. Not loud. Not frantic. A civilized announcement of invasion. When Lady Octavia entered the parlour, she looked neither travel-worn nor displeased. Her bonnet was dark, her gloves immaculate, her expression softened for a world that admired restraint and mistook it for virtue. She kissed the air near Isolde's cheek as if they were acquaintances of long standing rather than opponents forced into politeness. Mrs. Penrith. How kind of you to receive me without notice. Kindness is often easier when one has no warning, Isolde replied. Lady Octavia's smile did not falter. Her gaze moved to Beatrice. Miss Elloway. York air appears to have restored your colour. It has restored several things, my lady. Pride among them, I fear. No, Beatrice said. Only my memory, Lady Helena rose. The movement was graceful, but it changed the room. Lady Octavia turned to her with a faint bow. Lady Helena. I had not realized your family had taken such a deep interest in my former companion. My family tries not to confuse interest with ownership, Lady Helena said. It saves embarrassment. Isolde made a small sound that might have been a cough. Lady Octavia accepted tea she clearly did not want and waited until the servant left before removing a folded paper from her reticule. She placed it on the table between them. I have come to end this regrettable situation before it harms everyone involved. Beatrice looked at the paper. It was not the forged letter. It was newer, cleaner, prepared with a hand that expected obedience. What is that? A statement. You will acknowledge that your departure from Merrow House resulted from a personal misunderstanding. You will affirm that Lord Edmund never offered marriage, encouragement, or private commitment. You will express gratitude for my discretion. Isolde's eyes became bright and hard. How generous. She is to apologize for being slandered and thank you for arranging it. Mrs. Penrith, I appreciate family loyalty, but sentiment does not pay annuities. The room changed. Beatrice felt it before she understood why. Isolde went still. Lady Helena looked from one woman to the other. Lady Octavia touched the paper with 2 fingers. Your late husband, if I recall correctly, secured certain income through Merrow influence. Old obligations can be reviewed. Trustees can ask questions. Payments can be delayed. I would dislike seeing a respectable widow inconvenienced by a young woman's theatrical pride. Beatrice's breath caught. There it was. Not a raised voice. Not a threat society would condemn if repeated. A polished finger on the weakest hinge of another woman's life. Isolde's chin lifted. My annuity is lawful. Most things are lawful until examined by men who enjoy examining them. Beatrice felt shame return in a new form, not for herself this time, but because her refusal might cost the woman who had opened a door to her. Lady Octavia saw the wound land. She always did. Sign it, the Marchioness said gently, and this ends. You may live quietly with your aunt. Lord Edmund will proceed with a proper engagement. His Grace will return to his estate, where he will soon discover that indignation is a poor foundation for continued interest. The words struck harder than Beatrice wanted them to. Not because she trusted Lady Octavia, but because fear often borrowed the enemy's voice when it wished to sound sensible. A duke could return to his estate. A marchioness could return to London. Beatrice and Isolde would remain where gossip found them. Beatrice reached for the statement, not to sign it, but to read the lines by which Lady Octavia intended to reduce her. Before she could touch it, carriage wheels sounded outside. A moment later, the maid announced the Duke of Alderwick. Sebastian entered with rein on his shoulders and controlled urgency in his face. His gaze found Beatrice first. It asked a question no one else in the room could hear. She answered with the smallest shake of her head. Not yet. His eyes moved to the paper on the table, then to Lady Octavia. You are far from Mayfair, Lady Merrow. As are you, Your Grace. I came by invitation. How fortunate. Then perhaps you will help persuade Miss Elloway to avoid further injury to her own name. Lady Helena stepped toward him and murmured, an annuity threat. The Duke's expression did not change, but something colder entered the room. Against Mrs. Penrith. I merely observed that public scandal has private consequences, Lady Octavia said. A truth your Grace seems determined to forget. He looked at Beatrice then, and for the first time since she had known him, she saw uncertainty. Not weakness. Calculation under pressure. His instinct was to shield. His rank could silence this room, but not every room beyond it. A woman like Lady Octavia did not need proof to wound. She needed only a story repeated long enough. Miss Elloway will sign nothing today, he said. Beatrice's shoulders eased. Then Lady Octavia turned toward the parlour windows, where 2 women had paused under umbrellas across the street, pretending to admire the wet stone frontage. Her voice grew softer. Your Grace may command this parlour. You cannot command every eye in York. Already people ask why you followed my former companion north. They ask whether she summoned you. They ask whether your interest is noble, reckless, or something less kind. I wonder how long Miss Elloway's dignity will survive your protection. The silence that followed was worse because the question was not empty. Beatrice saw it move through the room, through Lady Helena's tightened hand, through Isolde's anger, through the Duke's stillness. He had brought honor with him, but honor did not always protect a woman from implication. Sebastian turned toward the window. The two women outside hurried on, too late to pretend they had heard nothing. When he spoke, his words were careful. Too careful. My journey to York concerns estate business in the North Riding. Miss Elloway's situation came to my attention by coincidence. Beatrice did not understand the wound at first. It was too quiet. It arrived without drama, without the sharpness of Lady Octavia's insult. Then it opened. Estate business. Coincidence. Words chosen to protect her from scandal by removing her from the reason he had come. Words that placed her, once again, out of sight for her own good. Lady Octavia's eyes lowered in victory. Isolde's lips parted, then closed. Lady Helena looked at her brother as if he had stepped on glass and not yet felt the blood. Sebastian turned back to Beatrice. He saw it then. Too late. The color had left her face, but her posture was perfect. That was how he knew he had hurt her. Miss Elloway, he began. She picked up the two halves of the torn calling card from beside her ledger. She had brought them down that morning because she had begun to think of them as evidence. Now they felt like foolishness. She crossed the room and placed both halves in his hand. His fingers closed by instinct, then stilled. If your grace wishes to manage the story, she said, her voice low and even, you may as well keep all of it. Beatrice, Isolde said softly. Lady Octavia's smile returned, faint as a blade seen beneath silk. How sensible. Perhaps we may yet restore order. Beatrice looked at her. No, my lady. You have mistaken injury for obedience. She turned to the Duke. It cost more to face him than to face Lady Octavia. You were right that I should not sign anything today. But you were wrong to think silence becomes less damaging when spoken by a kinder mouth. His face changed. Not defensiveness. Recognition, immediate and painful. I was trying to protect you. Yes, she said. That is why it hurt. No one moved. Even Lady Octavia seemed briefly deprived of satisfaction by the honesty of it. Beatrice returned to the table, took the unsigned statement, and folded it once. She did not tear it. Lady Octavia had already taught her that tearing paper could look too much like power and accomplish too little. I will consider what must be done, Beatrice said. But not under threat, and not in hiding. Lady Octavia rose. Then you leave me no choice but to settle this where it began. In London? Isolde asked. In the proper drawing room, before people capable of understanding consequence. The Duke's hand tightened around the torn card. Lady Merrow. No, Your Grace. You have made yourself an interested party only to deny interest at the window. I shall not be lectured on courage by a man who travels 200 miles and calls it estate business. The blow landed because it was partly deserved. Beatrice saw Sebastian accept it without reply. That steadied her anger, but not her trust. Lady Octavia gathered her gloves. Miss Elloway, you have until tomorrow morning. Sign, and your aunt remains undisturbed. Refuse, and London will hear your explanation from your own lips. When the Marchioness left, the house seemed to exhale around the wrong people. Rain tapped against the glass. Isolde reached for Beatrice's hand, but Beatrice stepped back gently. Not rejection. Necessity. She needed to stand without being held. The Duke remained near the window, the torn card in his hand like a judgment he had earned. I failed you, he said. Beatrice looked at him for a long moment. Yes. His jaw tightened. I will correct it. Not by deciding for me. No. Not by hiding me. No. She wanted to believe him. That was the dangerous part. Wanting had led her once into shadow. She would not follow it blindly again. She turned toward the table, where Lady Octavia's statement lay folded and unsigned. For the first time since leaving Merrow House, she knew exactly where she must go next. Not because the Duke had come for her. Not because Lady Octavia had threatened her. Because the room that broke her still believed it owned the ending. Beatrice Elloway would return to London. And this time, she would not enter by the side door. By morning, Beatrice had packed for London with the same care she had once given Lady Octavia's invitations. Gowns folded flat. Gloves mended. Letters tied with ribbon. No unnecessary sentiment allowed to spill over the edges. Mrs. Isolde Penrith watched from the doorway with her arms crossed, displeasure arranged over affection like a shawl. "You are certain?" she asked. "No," Beatrice said, closing the trunk. But certainty is a luxury usually enjoyed by people who are not being hunted by other people's stories. Isolde entered and picked up the unsigned statement Lady Octavia had left behind. "This thing is an insult to paper. Do not tear it." "I had considered burning it." "Not that either." Beatrice took it and placed it between two blank sheets. "It may be useful to know exactly what she wished me to become." Isolde's face softened. "A liar against yourself. A grateful one." That was worse. Beatrice tied the packet closed and placed it in her reticule, where the torn calling card should have been. Its absence felt strange, like removing a ring she had never worn. The Duke had kept both halves after she returned them. She had meant the gesture as rebuke. All night, it had returned to her as a question. Had she given away evidence, or had she forced him to carry the damage he had tried to manage? She did not know. She only knew that the next room, the next test, the next public breath of this matter had to happen where it began. Not in York, where Lady Octavia could threaten widows behind parlour curtains. In London. In Merrow House. In the room where Beatrice had been expected to bend. "I am coming with you," Isolde said. "You need not." "I didn't ask whether I needed to." "I informed you." "Aunt, if Lady Octavia pursues the annuity, then she shall discover that I have spent 15 years as a widow learning how to make respectable men uncomfortable in offices. Do not insult me by making me fragile for your convenience." Beatrice looked at her, and for the first time since leaving Merrow House, laughter came without breaking something on the way out. It was brief, but real. Isolde touched her cheek. "There. That is the face I remember. Frightened, stubborn, and planning something your mother would have pretended to condemn while secretly admiring." Before Beatrice could answer, the maid announced the Duke of Alderwick and Lady Helena Vale. Beatrice's hand stilled over the trunk straps. "Show them to the parlour," Isolde said. "And leave the door open. In this house, we provide propriety before anyone has time to accuse us of lacking it." Sebastian stood when Beatrice entered. He had the look of a man who had slept little and thought too precisely. Lady Helena was beside him, calm as ever, though the glance she gave her brother suggested he had been difficult since dawn. The torn card lay in Sebastian's hand. Not hidden. Not displayed. Held. "Miss Elloway," he said. "Mrs. Penrith." Beatrice curtsied, then looked directly at him. "I am returning to London." "I know." "Because you guessed. Because Lady Merrow meant to frighten you away from doing so. You have rarely done what she wished since I met you." "That is a generous description of desperation." "No," he said. "It is a precise description of courage under pressure." She did not want the words to matter. They did. That made her more careful. "My aunt will accompany me." "As will I, if you permit it." The room quieted. Lady Helena glanced down at her gloves. Isolde looked from Beatrice to the Duke and wisely said nothing. Beatrice moved to the window. Rain had left the glass clean, and the street beyond looked almost innocent. "Your Grace, yesterday you said your journey concerned estate business." His face did not harden in defense. That, at least, was something. "I did." "Was that true?" "No." The direct answer unsettled her more than excuse would have done. She turned. "Then why say it?" "Because I believed, wrongly, that if I removed you from the reason for my journey, I would remove you from speculation." "You removed me from my own truth." "Yes." He accepted the blow without flinching. "I crossed England because you were wronged." I will return only if you permit me to stand where I failed to stand. The words fell into the parlour with no ornament around them. Beatrice heard the difference between declaration and performance. He was not asking to be forgiven. He was asking to be instructed where his honour had gone astray. That was rarer. More dangerous. If you come, she said, you will not speak for me unless I ask. I will not. You will not soften facts to protect my reputation while letting Lady Octavia keep power over the story. I will not. You will not treat me as a symbol of your generosity. His eyes met hers. I would deserve your contempt if I did. I have not decided what you deserve. Lady Helena made a faint sound that might have been approval. Sebastian inclined his head. Then I shall endeavour not to make the decision easier in the wrong direction. Beatrice should not have smiled. She did, barely. The moment passed quickly, but it left the room altered. Isolde seated herself with great purpose. Now that moral thunder has cleared the air, what practical arrangements exist? The Duke turned toward her. Mr. Harcourt has written from London. A maid at Merrow House, Alice Pratt, is willing to give a statement if protected from dismissal. She saw Miss Lavinia Say enter Lady Merrow's morning room on the afternoon Miss Elloway left. Miss Say removed stationery and sealing wax from the desk. Beatrice's stomach tightened. Lavinia? Yes. Lady Helena's expression cooled. She looked too innocent. It is a common failing among the guilty. There is more, the Duke said. Harcourt believes the altered phrases in the forged letter came from an older page, possibly one written by you and taken from your desk. Beatrice sat slowly. My desk was cleared before I left. There was a letter I never sent. I thought I had destroyed it. Someone may have kept part of it. She closed her hands in her lap. Her shame rose by habit, then met the memory of her own voice at the assembly. I could not bear to be hidden forever. Then let them produce it, she said. I will not be frightened by a feeling I have already admitted. Sebastian looked at her with something like pride, quickly restrained. Harcourt will secure Alice's statement before we arrive. He will also confirm the stationer and wax. No long parade of documents, Beatrice said. People become bored with ink before they become bored with cruelty. Agreed. We need enough proof to prevent denial, not enough paper to bury the truth. Isolde nodded. I begin to see why people call you formidable. Usually when they wish to avoid calling me right, he said. A footman arrived then with a note brought from the inn. Lady Helena took it, read, and her face changed. She looked to her brother. From London. Sebastian accepted the note. His expression sharpened as he read. Beatrice stood without meaning to. What has happened? He looked at her, and she knew before he answered that the blow had been shaped for her. Lord Edmund Cresswell's engagement to Miss Lavinia Say is to be announced at a dinner at Merrow House. The room held still. Beatrice had thought Edmund finished as a wound. She discovered there was one part of him left capable of hurting her. Not because she wanted him. That had ended in the passage outside her room. But because his weakness had found such a swift and proper reward, and because the woman who may have helped twist Beatrice's words would be welcomed where Beatrice had been cast out. Isolde muttered something unsuitable beneath her breath. Lady Helena said, "How efficient of them." Beatrice drew one slow breath. Then another. The old Beatrice might have wondered what defect in herself allowed Lavinia to be chosen and herself discarded. The woman who had stood in York Assembly rooms knew better. Then the dinner will have witnesses, she said. Sebastian folded the note. Yes. And Lady Octavia will expect me to arrive either humbled or absent. Yes. Then she is due for disappointment. A quietness settled over him, deep and attentive. Miss Elloway, I will not pretend the room will be kind. It was not kind the first time. This time you will not stand alone. She looked at him for a long moment. Beside me, she said. Not before me. Beside you, he answered. In daylight. The words did not heal everything. They did not return the card to wholeness, or remove Lady Octavia's threat, or erase the sight of Edmund looking at the carpet while her name was made smaller. but they made a narrow bridge across the distrust between them, and Beatrice, who had learned to distrust bridges built by gentlemen, found herself willing to step onto the first plank. That afternoon, tickets were arranged. Trunks were sent ahead. Isolde gave instructions with the authority of a general. Lady Helena wrote 3 notes to women whose presence in London could make gossip more careful. The Duke sent one final message to Mr. Harcourt, instructing him to protect the maid before obtaining the statement, because truth purchased by another woman's ruin was only another form of cowardice. As evening lowered over York, Beatrice stood alone for a moment in her aunt's parlour. The false letter lay sealed in one packet. Lady Octavia's statement lay in another. The place in her reticule where the torn card had rested remained empty, but no longer hollow. Some evidence belonged in one's hand. Some belonged with the person who needed to understand its weight. Outside, the carriage lamps were being lit for the morning departure. London waited with its drawing rooms, its polished cruelty, its ordered trays of names. Beatrice had left it once as a dismissed companion. She would return as a woman no longer willing to let others decide how softly she must disappear. London did not look ashamed to receive her. That was the first thing Beatrice noticed when the carriage turned into Mayfair beneath a sky the colour of polished pewter. The houses stood as they had always stood, pale and confident, their windows bright with reflected daylight, their doors guarded by brass knockers and footmen trained to reveal nothing. A flower seller moved along the curb with violets in a basket. A pair of ladies stepped into a waiting carriage, laughing beneath trimmed bonnets. Nothing in the square suggested that a woman had once walked away from it with her name torn in half inside her glove. Beatrice sat beside Mrs. Isolde Penrith, with Lady Helena Vale opposite them, and kept her hands folded in her lap. The Duke of Alderwick rode ahead in his own carriage, not because distance pleased him, but because propriety required arrangements that gossip could not easily bruise. Even so, his presence had travelled with them for 200 miles like a second spine. At every station, every inn, every pause in the journey south, he had been there without crowding her. He had asked after her comfort without making comfort a debt. He had spoken to Isolde more often than to Beatrice, and that restraint, rather than cooling her awareness of him, sharpened it. It was difficult not to trust a man who kept choosing not to use the power others handed him. Yet trust was not a ribbon to be tied after one apology. Beatrice reminded herself of that as Merrow House came into view. The steps had been washed. The windows shone. The same door stood before her, black and glossy, as if it had never watched her leave at dawn. Isolde leaned close. "Breathe before you step down, or I'll be forced to tell everyone your air improved your courage but not your lungs." Beatrice almost smiled. "I am breathing." Not convincingly. The carriage stopped. A footman approached. His face changed when he saw Beatrice, not enough for reproach, but enough for recognition. He looked next to Lady Helena and then beyond her to the Duke, who had already descended and stood near the steps with Mr. Harcourt beside him. The solicitor was a spare man in dark clothes, carrying a leather case that looked too modest to hold the weight of several reputations. Sebastian did not offer Beatrice his hand. Not before the footman. Not before the windows. He bowed instead, exact and formal. "Miss Elloway. Mrs. Penrith. Lady Helena." "Your Grace," Beatrice said. His eyes held hers for one beat longer than courtesy demanded, but not long enough to feed scandal. "Mr. Harcourt has secured Mrs. Pratt's statement." Alice Pratt, the maid who had seen Lavinia say enter Lady Octavia's morning room, was safe under the temporary protection of one of Lady Helena's acquaintances. Beatrice had insisted upon hearing that before anything else. A truth purchased by sacrificing a maid would have tasted too much like Merrow House. "She will not lose her place because of me?" Beatrice asked. "She has already accepted a better one," Lady Helena said. "With a cousin of mine who appreciates brave servants and underpays no one." Isolde said, astonishing. "Justice with wages. London may yet survive." The Duke's mouth nearly softened. Then the door opened. The butler, Mr. Vale, not to be confused with the Duke's name, though Beatrice had once found the coincidence privately amusing, stood within the hall. His composure held by discipline alone. "Your Grace. Lady Helena. Mrs. Penrith. Miss Elloway." He spoke her name last, but he spoke it. That mattered more than she wished. They entered. The hall smelled of beeswax, lilies, and old authority. Every object was familiar. The marble-topped console. The umbrella stand. The gilt mirror where Beatrice had once checked that no ink stained her sleeve before carrying notes into the drawing-room. Near the door to the front parlour stood the card tray. It was silver, polished to a judgmental shine, and arranged with the names of those expected for Lady Octavia's dinner. Beatrice saw Lord Edmund Cresswell. Miss Lavinia Say. Lady Dalrymple. Mrs. Arvanel. Two other names she knew only from seating plans. Her own was not there. Of course it was not there. Still, the absence moved through her like cold water. To be invited into a room and erased from its threshold was a refinement of cruelty she should have anticipated. The Duke saw her see it. He did not ask permission aloud. He took one of his own calling cards from the case Mr. Harcourt carried, then turned to the butler. The card tray is incomplete. The butler's hands tightened. My lady prepared the list herself, Your Grace. Then she omitted a guest. Sebastian placed a fresh card on the tray. Not his own alone. Beneath it, in a hand Beatrice recognized from the note sent in York, lay a newly written card. Miss Beatrice Elloway. He set his card directly below it. Not covering it. Supporting it. The butler stared for a fraction of a second too long, then bowed. Of course, Your Grace. Beatrice felt Isolde's hand brush the back of her sleeve, a silent warning not to weep in a hallway owned by the enemy. She did not. Her eyes remained dry. The ache went deeper than tears. A door opened above the stairs. Lady Octavia descended in black silk, with diamonds at her ears and calm in every step. Lavinia Say followed in pale green, all softness and lowered lashes. Edmund came last. He looked older than he had a week before, though not wiser. Beatrice met his eyes once and found regret there, but regret without courage had already spent its value. Lady Octavia's gaze moved to the card tray. She understood at once. A faint line appeared near her mouth and vanished. Your Grace, she said. How kind to lend consequence to an uncomfortable matter. I have found that uncomfortable matters often require witnesses. Indeed. Then perhaps tonight we may finish what Miss Elloway has prolonged. Beatrice heard the trap beneath the Polish. If truth has been delayed, my lady, it was not by me. Lavinia's lashes lifted. Her eyes were very blue and very careful. No one wishes to injure you, Miss Elloway. We all hope for peace. Peace built on my apology would be convenient, not honest. Edmund took a step. Beatrice, I hope we may speak later. She turned toward him fully. You have had several chances to speak, Lord Edmund. I suggest you save the next one for the room. Colour rose in his face. Lady Octavia's voice cooled. You have grown bold in a short absence. No, my lady. I have grown tired. For a moment, no one moved. Then Lady Helena said pleasantly, Shall we go in? I find moral tension less oppressive when one is seated. The dinner had not yet begun. Guests were gathering in the drawing-room, the same room where the card had been torn. Beatrice paused before the threshold. The doorway seemed narrower than memory and wider than fear. Inside, candlelight touched the tea table, the chairs, the carpet where paper had fallen. People turned as she entered. She heard the pause. It was almost a living thing. The Duke remained just behind her right shoulder, exactly where he had promised to stand. Beside her. Not before. Mr. Harcourt took a discreet position near the door. Isolde entered with the air of a woman prepared to outlive every fool present. Lady Helena moved toward Lady Dalrymple with a greeting so gracious it became a warning. Beatrice had no time to settle before a footman approached with a folded note on a salver. He looked pale. For Miss Elloway, From my lady. Lady Octavia stood across the room, watching. Beatrice opened it. The words were brief. Sign before dinner is announced, and your aunt's annuity will remain undisturbed. Refuse, and you will apologize aloud. Beatrice folded the note once and placed it in her reticule. She looked up to find Sebastian watching her, his expression held in strict control. She crossed to the alcove near the pianoforte, where the open doors kept them in sight but lowered their voices. He followed only when she inclined her head. "What has she done?" he asked. She handed him the note. He read it. His face became very still. "I will stop this now." "No." His eyes lifted. "Miss Elloway." "No," she repeated, softer but firmer. "If you stop it before she speaks, she will say I hid behind you. She threatened your aunt." "Yes. And I will not let her make my fear perform obedience." He closed his hand around the note, then loosened it as if remembering paper had suffered enough between them. "I am sorry," he said. "For York. For making you feel hidden when I meant to spare you." The apology did not ask to be admired. It stood there, bare and late and necessary. Beatrice looked toward the drawing-room, where Lady Octavia was arranging her guests as if people were furniture. "Tonight will answer," she said. "Not your apology." "Not yet." "Your choice." He bowed his head once. "Then I will choose plainly." A bell sounded for dinner, but Lady Octavia did not move toward the dining-room. Instead, she stepped to the center of the drawing-room, where every face could see her. "Before we dine," she said, "Miss Elloway has a statement to make regarding the unfortunate confusion she has caused." Conversation died. Edmund looked sick. Lavinia's hand tightened around her fan. Isolde stood straighter. The Duke turned, but did not step ahead. Beatrice felt the old room waiting for her to become small. She walked toward its center. Beatrice Elloway had walked across that drawing-room once as a dismissed woman, every step measured by the pleasure others took in her humiliation. Now she crossed it again while the same carpet waited beneath her feet, the same chandelier held its cold fire above her head, and the same painted ancestors watched from the walls as though rank itself had been framed in gilt. The room had changed only in one respect. This time, she had chosen to stand there. Lady Octavia Cresswell stood near the tea table with the calm satisfaction of a hostess who had arranged not merely a dinner, but a verdict. Lord Edmund remained beside the mantel, his mouth drawn tight, his eyes fixed upon a point somewhere near Beatrice's shoulder. Miss Lavinia Say sat close to Lady Dalrymple, pale green silk gathered around her like innocence carefully sewn for display. Mrs. Arvanel held her fan motionless. Two gentlemen whose names Beatrice had copied countless times now stared at her with the grave curiosity of men encountering damage at a safe distance. Isolde stood near the door, rigid with restrained fury. Lady Helena Vale watched everything with cool, merciless attention. The Duke of Alderwick did not move in front of Beatrice. He remained slightly to her right, within sight, within reach of witness, but not between her and the room. That mattered. It mattered enough that she could breathe. Lady Octavia lifted her chin. "Miss Elloway, we are prepared to hear you." The phrasing was perfect. Not kind. Perfect. It made generosity of coercion and order of disgrace. Beatrice looked at the faces before her and understood that most of them already knew what they wished to hear. They wanted her to apologize for wanting too much. They wanted a poor gentlewoman to confess ambition so the titled could forgive themselves for punishing it. She folded her hands. Her gloves were plain. One seam near the thumb had been mended twice. She saw Lavinia notice and look away. "I owe an apology," Beatrice said. A satisfied breath passed through the room. Lady Octavia's shoulders eased by less than an inch. Edmund closed his eyes. It was strange, Beatrice thought, how many people relaxed when a woman began to blame herself. "I owe an apology to the young woman I was," she continued, and the room stilled. Lady Octavia's gaze sharpened. Beatrice kept her voice even. "I owe her an apology for believing silence was always dignity. For allowing the fear of seeming ungrateful to make her accept insult as correction. For thinking a promise spoken in private could become honorable without courage in public. For letting other people decide which parts of her were useful, which parts were inconvenient, and which parts should be hidden." Edmund looked at her then. Fully. Too late. Lady Octavia's hand tightened around the back of a chair. "Miss Elloway," she said, softly enough to sound like a warning meant only for the well-bred, "this is not the statement we discussed." "No, my lady. It is the statement I can make truthfully." A murmur moved through the guests. Beatrice heard it as she had heard every whisper for years, but it no longer entered her like command. I will not apologize for a letter I did not compose. I will not apologize for a feeling someone else altered into evidence. I will not apologize for leaving a house after my name was torn in half before guests. And I will not call gratitude what was demanded of me under threat. Isolde's mouth trembled, then firmed. Lady Helena lowered her gaze briefly, perhaps to hide approval. Lavinia's fan gave one sharp snap as it opened. Lady Octavia recovered with admirable speed. This is a regrettable display. Miss Elloway was treated with consideration in my house until she mistook employment for equality and courtesy for attachment. Her current emotion is understandable, perhaps, but hardly reliable. Beatrice did not answer at once. She had spent years answering women like Lady Octavia too quickly, because speed could be mistaken for usefulness. Now she let the silence sit. The room disliked it. That gave her strength. The Duke spoke from beside her. Lady Merrow, may I ask a question? Lady Octavia turned toward him with an expression that was almost welcoming. Of course, Your Grace. I hope you may restore proportion to the matter. Why did you tear Miss Elloway's calling card? The question entered the room with no flourish. It did more damage because of that. Lady Dalrymple glanced at Mrs. Arvanel. Edmund's face lost colour. Lavinia stared at the pattern of her fan. Lady Octavia smiled, but her eyes had gone still. I beg your pardon. In this room, several days ago, you tore Miss Elloway's calling card in two. I heard the sound from the music room. I ask why. A domestic correction is not worthy of your Grace's attention. I will decide what is worthy of my attention. His voice did not rise. No one mistook that for softness. If Miss Elloway was as insignificant as you have suggested, why did a small card frighten you enough to destroy it in front of witnesses? Lady Octavia gave a delicate laugh. Frighten me? You choose an extravagant word. I choose a precise one. The card was placed improperly. I removed it. You did not remove it. You tore it. Lady Octavia looked toward the guests, claiming them by habit. You see how a trivial act becomes theatre when repeated by a man determined to misunderstand. Beatrice felt the pull of the old order. Lady Octavia had only to make the room smile, and cruelty would become manners again. But the Duke took one step, not forward toward Beatrice, but toward the tea table where Lady Octavia had once stood with paper in her hand. I misunderstand very little. You told her there were levels in society. You told her to find someone of her own. Then you sent stories after her to York, including a letter built from words she did not arrange. That is outrageous. It is incomplete, he said. Not outrageous. Lavinia went very still. Lady Octavia's gaze cut toward her, quick as the flash of a knife beneath linen. Beatrice saw it. So did the Duke. So, perhaps, did Lady Helena, whose expression cooled into something near satisfaction. Edmund stepped away from the mantel. Mother, if there is a letter, be silent, Edmund. The words cracked through the room before Lady Octavia softened them with a smile. You are agitated. This entire affair has been painful for you. Beatrice looked at him. There he was, a man made small by obedience, being pitied by the very woman who had used his weakness as a weapon. Once, that sight would have hurt her for both of them. Now it simply explained him. Lord Edmund, she said. Did you ever intend to speak for me? He opened his mouth. No answer came. That is answer enough. The silence that followed was not empty. It was crowded with every private conversation, every almost promise, every retreat he had called caution. Lady Octavia turned sharply back to Beatrice. You presume too much upon a gentleman's embarrassment. No, Beatrice said. I have presumed too much before. I am finished with it. The Duke reached inside his coat and drew out a folded piece of paper. He did not display it yet. Lady Merrow, when Miss Elloway left this house, one half of her card went with her. The other remained under your chair. I picked it up. He unfolded the small torn piece and laid it on the table. A room full of people leaned toward it without meaning to. It was only cream paper, only ink, only the broken remnant of a name. Yet it held the room more firmly than any jewel could have done. "You kept it?" Lady Octavia asked. "Yes." "How sentimental." "No." "Careful." He looked at Beatrice then, not long, not possessively. "Enough. Someone in this house thought tearing a card would make a woman easier to deny. I thought it might one day prove the opposite." Beatrice felt the word strike somewhere deep, where humiliation had lodged and hardened. He had carried the other half not as a trophy, not as a romantic token, not even as rescue. He had carried proof that she had been seen when she believed herself discarded. Lady Octavia's face had gone very pale beneath its powder. "A torn card proves nothing except that your Grace has allowed a misplaced sense of gallantry to overcome judgment. Then we shall discuss the letter." Lavinia rose too quickly. "I think this is most distressing for Miss Elloway. Surely we needn't continue before dinner." Lady Helena looked at her. "How thoughtful. Your compassion arrives exactly where your discomfort begins." Lavinia Saturday. Lady Octavia's voice cooled to ice. "I will not permit my guests to be harassed by insinuation. Miss Elloway was dismissed for impropriety. She has returned under your Grace's protection and now seeks revenge by endangering my son's engagement." "Your son's engagement appears to have endangered itself," the Duke said. "Miss Say's name has arisen in connection with Merrow stationery, sealing wax, and the altered letter." Lavinia whispered, "I don't know what you mean." It was the right phrase, spoken in the wrong voice. Beatrice heard fear beneath it. So did Lady Octavia, whose expression hardened with swift warning. The Duke did not press. Not yet. His restraint tightened the room more effectively than accusation. Lady Octavia turned to the guests. "Enough. I have indulged this because I respect your Grace's position, but rank does not make conjecture into evidence. You have a torn card and a young woman's wounded pride. Nothing more." She faced him directly. "Produce proof, your Grace, or admit you have crossed England for a liar." The room went utterly silent. Beatrice felt the insult move toward her, polished, old, and hungry. This time, it did not reach her alone. Sebastian Vale turned the torn half of the card so that her broken name faced upward, and his voice, when he answered, was quiet enough to make every soul in the room listen. "Very well," he said. "Let us produce proof." Mr. Harcourt stepped forward as if he had been waiting for precisely that sentence. He did not hurry. Haste would have made the matter look theatrical, and truth, Beatrice had learned, was strongest when it refused to perform. The solicitor placed his leather case upon a side table, opened it, and withdrew 3 folded papers, a small square of stationery, and a strip of dark red sealing wax wrapped in tissue. The room watched every movement. Lady Octavia stood near the tea table, her face composed, but her hand remained on the chair back with a grip too firm for ease. Lavinia Say had gone white beneath the careful bloom of her cheeks. Edmund looked from the papers to Beatrice, then to his mother, as if only now discovering that silence had consequences beyond discomfort. The Duke did not begin with the solicitor. He began with Beatrice. "Miss Elloway," he said, "you opened this matter in your own words. With your permission, I will answer Lady Merrow's demand." Every eye turned to her. It would have been easy, even now, for him to take over and make her dignity another ornament of his authority. Instead, he waited. The pause was not long, but it returned something to her. Beatrice inclined her head. "You may answer it." Only then did he turn to the room. The letter circulated in York was not written as it appeared. It was assembled from altered phrases, one of which was taken from a private page belonging to Miss Elloway. The paper came from the Merrow House supply. The wax came from Lady Merrow's morning room. The first witness to that fact is not a duke, nor a lady of rank, but a maid who had more courage than several people born above her. Lady Octavia's lips parted. "You will not drag servants into my drawing room." "No," he said. "You did that when you used a house dependent upon obedience to hide dishonor." Mr. Harcourt unfolded the first paper. "The statement of Alice Pratt, formerly under housemaid at Merrow House, taken this morning in my presence and in the presence of Lady Helena Vale's steward." Mrs. Pratt states that on the afternoon of Miss Elloway's departure, she saw Miss Lavinia Say enter the Marchioness of Merrow's morning room. Miss Say removed 2 sheets of Bond Street stationery and a stick of dark red sealing wax from the writing cabinet. Mrs. Pratt was later instructed not to mention the matter. Lavinia rose halfway. "That girl is lying." Lady Helena's voice was soft. "Mrs. Pratt has already accepted a place in my cousin's household, Miss Say. She has nothing to gain from pleasing us and everything to lose by displeasing you. That gives her words an advantage yours currently lack." A ripple crossed the room. Lady Dalrymple lowered her fan entirely. Lady Octavia looked toward Lavinia, not with concern, but command. "Sit. Be silent. Survive." Lavinia sat, but her hands shook over the lace of her gown. The Duke took up the square of stationery. "The paper is matched by watermark to Lady Merrow's private supply. Mr. Harcourt obtained confirmation from the stationer this afternoon. The wax contains the same darker resin used on Merrow correspondence. That alone might prove access, not intent. The seal fragment found with the copy in York proves more." Harcourt placed the tissue-wrapped wax upon the table. The partial crest showed beneath the candlelight, cut sharply along one edge. It was sliced from a different fold, the solicitor said. Clumsily enough to leave fibres from the original paper. Isolde Penrith looked at Lady Octavia. How inconvenient that paper remembers what polite people forget. No one laughed. They were too intent upon the unravelling. The Duke turned at last to Lavinia. "Miss Say, you brought the seal fragment to Mrs. Pritchard through an intermediary. You were seen at the assembly rooms before the paper was found." "I was visiting friends," Lavinia whispered. "Then name the friend." Her eyes darted to Lady Octavia. That small movement condemned her more neatly than any confession. Lady Octavia stepped forward. "Enough. A young lady frightened by scandal may look to me for guidance without being guilty of fabrication. If Miss Say made some foolish effort to defend Lord Edmund from Miss Elloway's pursuit, it was misguided, but understandable." Lavinia's head snapped up. The room saw it. The Duke saw it. Beatrice saw the precise instant Lavinia understood that she was being offered to the room as sacrifice. "No," Lavinia said, the word barely audible. Lady Octavia's expression froze. "Compose yourself." "No," Lavinia repeated, louder now, and her fan slipped from her lap to the carpet. "You said it would only prevent her from returning. You said no one would care about the details once Edmund and I were announced. You said she had no one." The room changed with the violence of a curtain pulled back, though no hand had touched anyone. Beatrice felt the words pass through her. She had no one. That had been the calculation. Not that she was guilty. Not that she was dangerous. That she was unprotected enough to be rewritten. Edmund took one step toward Lavinia, then stopped, as he always stopped. "Mother," he said. It was the voice of a son finally hearing the cost of obedience. Lady Octavia turned upon him. "Do not be foolish. Everything I did was for your future. My future." He looked at Beatrice, and the shame on his face was no longer decorative. It had weight. "I let Miss Elloway believe I would speak. I did not. I knew what Mother wished. I knew what would be expected. I told myself delay was kindness." His voice broke, but he did not look away this time. It wasn't kindness. It was cowardice. Beatrice listened without softening the truth for him. Once, that confession would have been everything. Now it was only necessary. "You let me stand alone," she said. Edmund bowed his head. "Yes." Lady Octavia's control cracked at the edge. "You will ruin yourself for a woman who was never suitable." The Duke moved then, not toward Beatrice, but into the center of the room where rank could no longer pretend neutrality. His voice was quiet. It carried to every corner. Suitability has been made to do ugly work in this house. It has been used to excuse a torn card, a false letter, a threatened widow, a frightened servant, and a son trained to call weakness duty. I will not permit it to be used against Miss Elloway again. He laid both halves of the calling card side by side on the table. The tear remained visible, but the name could be read. Miss Beatrice Elloway. Whole enough. I crossed England for Miss Elloway because no rank in this kingdom gives anyone the right to reduce her. The room went utterly still. He did not stop there, and that was what changed the silence from admiration to accountability. And I owe Miss Elloway an apology before the same class of witnesses who heard me fail her. In York, I allowed fear for her reputation to make me call my journey estate business. It was not. I went because she had been wronged. I should have said so then. Beatrice could not breathe for a moment. Not because the words rescued her. Because they did not ask to. They stood beside her truth and strengthened it without stealing it. Lady Octavia looked around the room for an ally and found calculation where loyalty had been. Lady Dalrymple rose first. Lady Merrow, I find myself unwell. My carriage, please. Mrs. Arvanel followed, murmuring that she had quite lost her appetite. One gentleman bowed to the Duke and not to his hostess. Another avoided Edmund's eyes entirely. This was not an explosion. It was worse for Lady Octavia. It was withdrawal. The slow removal of belief. Lavinia began to cry quietly, not prettily, and Lady Helena moved just enough to signal a maid to assist her without turning pity into spectacle. Edmund stood as if the furniture of his life had been taken from him. Lady Octavia remained upright by will alone. You have all been very dramatic, she said. Society has forgiven worse. Isolde looked at her with open disdain. Society often does. That is why it must occasionally be embarrassed into standards. The Duke turned to Beatrice. The anger had not left his face, but when he looked at her, it became something restrained and careful. Miss Elloway, I will ask nothing of you tonight except permission to see you safely from this house. Beatrice looked at the card on the table, at the tear that had once seemed like proof of her disposability, at the room where her shame had been arranged as entertainment and then returned to its makers. She did not feel triumphant. Triumph was too loud for what had happened. She felt steady. That was better. You may accompany me to the door, she said. Not carry me through it. Something near his eyes softened. Of course. She turned once to Lady Octavia. The Marchioness waited for accusation, perhaps even for gratitude that Beatrice would not make the scene uglier. Beatrice gave her neither. You told me to remember my level, she said. I shall. It is the place from which I refuse to lie. Then she walked toward the door. Isolde joined her on one side, Lady Helena on the other. The Duke followed beside them, not ahead. In the hall, the card tray waited beneath the lamps. Beatrice paused long enough to see her name still there, written plainly, with the Duke's card below it. For the first time, she did not need to touch the paper to know it was real. Behind her, the drawing room remained full of consequences. Ahead, the front door opened onto the night air of London, and Beatrice stepped through it by choice. Wetherham Court did not greet Beatrice with grandeur first. It greeted her with distance, wind, and a long grey road running between late autumn fields toward a house of pale stone set against the North Yorkshire hills. London had announced importance with polished doors and watchful windows. Wetherham seemed to breathe it from the earth itself. Rooks circled above the bare elms. Sheep moved like scattered wool across the slopes. The house stood broad and quiet beneath a sky washed with silver, neither inviting admiration nor fearing judgment. Beatrice sat in the carriage beside Mrs. Isolde Penrith, her gloved hands folded over a small box on her lap, and felt a strange absence inside her. Not emptiness. Absence of pursuit. No whisper had followed her from the last posting in. No note had arrived demanding apology. No woman with pearls and a perfect smile waited to reduce her in the name of order. For months had passed since the night at Merrow House. Long enough for scandal to change shape. Lady Octavia Cresswell had not been ruined in the dramatic way novels like to promise. She had not been cast from England, nor publicly shouted down in every room she entered. Society rarely punished its own with such honesty. But invitations had thinned. Patronage committees had discovered sudden scheduling difficulties. Lady Dalrymple had repeated the story in the tone of a woman who regretted having witnessed anything so vulgar, which meant everyone heard it. Mrs. Arvanel had withdrawn her support from the Marchioness's spring concert. Lord Edmund had left London before the season ended, carrying his broken engagement to Miss Lavinia Say like a lesson learned too late. Lavinia had gone to relatives in Bath, where, Lady Helena wrote, she was being improved by boredom. Alice Pratt had begun her new place and sent Beatrice one short note in careful handwriting: "I sleep better now, miss." That line had mattered as much as any grand apology. During those months, Sebastian Vale had courted Beatrice with a patience that unsettled her more deeply than haste could have done. He called first upon Isolde. He wrote when propriety required distance. He walked with Beatrice in public gardens where Lady Helena could complain about the cold and pretend not to notice the silences between them. He never asked her to forget. He never called her brave in a way that made pain sound decorative. When he finally asked whether she might consider becoming his wife, he did not kneel in a ballroom or offer the question before an audience that would force answer into spectacle. He asked in Isolde's parlour in York, with rain touching the windows and Lady Helena in the next room making far too much noise with a tea tray. "I don't want your gratitude," he had said. "I don't want to be rewarded for doing what should have been done sooner. I want the life in which I may spend years proving I understand the difference." Beatrice had looked at him for a long time. "And if I sometimes remember the wrong room?" His answer had been immediate. "Then we'll leave it together. Or stay until it no longer owns you. You will choose." She had chosen. Not because he was a duke. Not because he had crossed counties, confronted a marchioness, or placed her name where others could read it. She chose because he had learned to stand beside her without making his protection another wall. The wedding took place in the parish church near Wetherham on a morning so clear the frost shone along the grass like ground glass. Beatrice wore ivory wool and lace borrowed from Lady Helena, altered by a sempstress who declared with terrifying certainty that happiness required better sleeves. Isolde cried before the service and denied it afterward. Lady Helena stood with dry eyes and a suspiciously damp handkerchief. Sebastian's tenants filled the church quietly, not gawking at a woman lifted from scandal into rank, but greeting the future duchess with the grave curiosity of people deciding whether their duke had chosen wisely. Beatrice did not feel transformed when she spoke her vows. She felt seen. That was different. Transformation implied that she had become worthy at the altar. Being seen meant she had arrived worthy and was no longer required to apologize for it. Afterward, at Wetherham Court, the household lined the entrance hall. The housekeeper curtsied. The steward bowed. Footmen stood shoulder to shoulder in livery. Beatrice felt the old instinct to search for the place just outside the center of the room, the place where a useful woman could stand without troubling anyone. Sebastian noticed. Of course he did. He did not take her arm before the household. He simply turned slightly, creating space beside him, and waited until she stepped into it. "Your Grace," the housekeeper said, and the title moved through the hall toward Beatrice like something that might belong to another woman. Beatrice steadied herself. "Mrs. Calder," she said, remembering the name from Sebastian's letters. The housekeeper's expression warmed by a degree. "Welcome home." Home. The word did not rush into her heart. It knocked gently and waited. Later, when the guests had eaten, when Isolde had scolded the cook into accepting praise, and when Lady Helena had informed Sebastian that marriage had not improved his expression but might yet improve his manners, Beatrice found herself in the Duchess's writing room. Sebastian had not called it that. He had said only that there was a room she might like, and that nothing in it had been arranged beyond the desk, fire, and shelves because he would not presume to know how she wished to think. It overlooked the west lawn, where the hills darkened under evening. A new card case rested on the desk. Beside it lay a small packet wrapped in blue ribbon. Beatrice untied it slowly. Inside was a newly engraved calling card, cream stock, black ink, faultless and formal. The Duchess of Alderwick. Her breath caught, not because of the rank, but because of the space the words occupied without apology. Beneath it lay something else, set carefully between two panes of thin glass in a narrow brass frame. The torn calling card from Merrow House. Both halves. The line between them remained visible. Her old name could be read through the mended break, Miss Beatrice Elloway. Sebastian stood near the door, as if unwilling to enter the moment without invitation. "I can put it away," he said. "I didn't know whether you would want it seen." Beatrice lifted the frame. The tear looked smaller behind glass, but not erased. "You kept it all this time?" "Yes." "Why?" He came no closer. At first, because it was proof. Later, because I thought it belonged to you. And perhaps because I needed to remember the day I learned that seeing injustice is not enough if one still chooses the wrong silence. She looked at the old card, then at the new one. One carried the name she had defended. The other carried the name she had chosen. Neither was more honest than the other. I do not want it hidden, she said. Then it will stay. Not as a wound. No. His voice gentled. As witness. She set the brass frame on the desk, behind the new card, where evening light touched both. There were days I thought becoming safe would mean forgetting. Does it? She turned to him. No. I think it means remembering without being ruled. He crossed the room then, slowly enough that she could have stopped him with a word. She did not. He took her hand and bowed over it, not as a duke accepting admiration, but as a man honoring the woman whose hand he held. Beatrice, he said, and the absence of title made the room warmer. Are you happy? The question was too careful to be simple. He was not asking whether the house pleased her or whether rank soothed old injuries. He was asking whether the road between humiliation and here had ended somewhere she could breathe. She looked past him toward the window, the hills, the long road by which she had arrived. I am not afraid of being happy, she said. That is new. His hand closed around hers, steady and restrained. Then we shall begin there. In the hall below, a servant laughed softly and then hushed herself. Somewhere in the house, Isolde was likely reorganizing someone's opinions. Lady Helena's voice carried faintly from the drawing-room, dry and affectionate. Life, Beatrice realized, had not become a grand vindication scene held forever beneath chandeliers. It had become a door that opened without shame, a desk where her correspondence would be her own, a name that had been torn and still remained readable. She placed the new card beside the old one and watched them stand together in the lamplight. Miss Beatrice Elloway. The Duchess of Alderwick. Not a lower level and a higher one. A before and an after. Both hers.